Hello, everyone. Today I am joined by Eric Orman. This is a follow-up of our video that I produced last week, which was around Windows activation during COVID. A lot of you are using KMS. A lot of your customers are using KMS, and you're starting to run into some activation issues now that students are learning remote. So hello, Eric. Thank you for agreeing to come on and discuss Windows subscription-based activation. Do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, Joe, thank you. Eric Orman, I'm a senior technical specialist, my area within the U.S. education team. So I specialize primarily around education customers in California and Hawaii, and also been kind of bleeding up into the Northwest also lately.
Right. So a lot of schools are using KMS today. Why not use KMS in the cloud or set it up through Cloud Management Gateway? Why not just make KMS visible to the devices wherever they are?
That's a good question. A lot of people are using KMS because that's what they've always used historically to activate their Windows devices and also Office. A lot of them don't know how they can leverage just simply the M365 A3 or the E3 license in order to perform both Windows and Office activation. That's part of this journey that I like to call is to modern management. And so you need to leverage some of existing components in order to take advantage of that. But the benefits are you don't need a KMS service, server. You don't need to manage that hardware. You don't need to keep it running, maintaining it, the licenses on it, making sure your devices stay connected and rearming, all the heavy of that. You just simply assign a license to a user, and when that user logs onto a device that is Azure connected and has that enterprise license, it will both activate that device and do an addition upgrade to either enterprise or education version of it. And you don't need to do anything besides just ensuring that that license is assigned to that particular device. So the device communicates directly with Azure in order to do that activation of that.
You make it sound so easy.
Freedom is huge and reducing a lot of complexity.
Are any schools that you work with today using the Windows subscription-based activation?
Yeah, quite a few. In fact, I've also helped some schools transition from using the current KMS version to Windows Service Activation because those users are getting the prompts. Those devices are. So let's take a step back and just look at the situation of where customers are really at. And I'm going to share my screen here and kind of just talk through some points to kind of reiterate of this. So see and share my screen. So the way I like to frame this is Windows activation in a COVID world. And so there's my email address. But really the question comes down to this is users are getting Windows activation prompts. How do we turn this off? Because the devices are disconnected. I mean, there was the COVID fire sale in March. Devices left campus, and that's over 180 days ago. They're at home. They're effectively orphaned because they're typically AADJ joined devices. They have no line of sight to the domain controller, so they're using cached credentials. They're disconnected from KMS. They're not receiving updated group policies. Those devices may or may not be managed by any management solution like Intune or Config Manager. If not managed by, Intune's cloud-based, so it doesn't matter where the device is at as long as it has an internet connection, but Config Manager, and those devices are disconnected from that. If they have a CMG, a cloud management gateway that can maintain management, most customers don't even know about the value of CMG or are confused about that. We could save that for another session. But really just those devices are at home. They're disconnected. They're orphaned. And the number one thing that I talk with customers about is just how do I regain management of those devices, and secondarily, how do I maintain management of those particular devices? And so a lot of them just don't understand the value of what they have in their license, the M365 A3 or the E3, in order to do that. So within that license, you have the ability to leverage Windows subscription activation. You have Office 365 has been rebranded to M365 Apps. But again, that doesn't use a KMS. That uses activation just by simply assigning a license. So the question is not so much about how to get off KMS. It's more about what is your journey on this modern management to become more modern, a modern way of activating Windows, a more modern way of using Office. And that is a broader story beyond this. But if we were to just narrow back down into this and be really myopic in this, how we get from KMS to one of these modern ways, I'll go to my next slide. It's really, how do you retire KMS? That should be the real question that we have, is like, we don't want to do KMS anymore. And so we both know that Office and Windows uses KMS. So Windows subscription activation. This uses the embedded key into Windows. And so if you have a device, what this requires is the device to be either hybrid Azure AD joined or Azure domain joined. I said earlier that's connected to Azure. So a device can be connected to Azure in 3 different ways. It could be Azure AD registered, Azure AD joined, that's AADJ here on the screen, or hybrid Azure AD joined, which simply just means the device is still on-prem domain joined, but it has an Azure identity associated with it. And so in that hybrid Azure AD joined, which predominantly are majority of devices, there's a lot of benefits to that. I got another slide. I can walk you through that. But in order to leverage Windows subscription activation, a device has to be Azure AD joined or hybrid Azure AD joined, so Azure connected. And you assign that license, which is a part of that M365 A3 or E3. It's the Windows Enterprise license that's a product within that. There's a slew of products within that licensing suite. Make sure that's assigned. And when that user logs into that device, it'll do 2 things. It'll both activate that device and perform an edition upgrade. So if it's running Pro, it will be upgraded to either education, whichever version of Pro, Pro EDU or just Pro. It'll be upgraded to Enterprise or Education, and it will use that embedded key as its activation for that. And all you had to do is simply just assign that Windows 10 Enterprise license to that. That is a great way of just leveraging that cloud base. And so how do I take advantage of that? Just like I said, there's lots of documents out there that describe, but transitioning from KMS to Windows Service Application, there is a doc, it's top right corner up here, you could see it. So just screenshot it, maybe Joe will provide the link for that, but that walks you through the steps of how to transition. You need to run a PowerShell script or another type of script on that device to clear the KMS records so that it can use Windows subscription activation. It won't just automatically flip over. You actually have to run a script on that device. And so let's just look at the reality of the situation going back to earlier. These devices are at home. They're disconnected from Active Directory. There's no line of sight. They're low rights users. They have no VPN. You have no ability to run a command elevated on that device. So unfortunately, a lot of those devices are effectively stuck. I was just on a call with a customer right before this where we were talking about this exact same thing, and what they are instructing those students, and not students but faculty, is they put hotspots in the parking lot on the light posts, and so they tell people to come back into the parking lot, log into the domain, and those devices get activated. But a part of that journey when they come back is also enabling hybrid Azure AD join, deploying Intune to those devices so that as they come back on, they reestablish a connection. They get hybrid Azure AD join. Devices can switch over to use Windows subscription activation. They get enrolled into Intune. And then once they have those 2 particular things, I'll even go to say is they'll come back on, and also if they're just using Config Manager, get instructions to use a CMG. That's another thing, because devices out in the wild, if you deploy a CMG, they're not going to automatically know to start using a CMG. They actually have to communicate with Config Manager to get the instructions to use a CMG. So, reestablishing a connection back to Active Directory and also Config Manager, they'll get those instructions. And then as they wander back at home, they'll still be able to have that maintain that either through Intune or Config Manager, that management reach in order to do things. So that's kind of the one all be all, and I'm talking kind of fast at that, but you guys are all smart people, so you understand what I'm saying. So coupled with that, go ahead, Joe. Yeah, I didn't give you a chance to talk.
So if they're an administrator on their device, right? Maybe they're a faculty member, the school hasn't set up anything. If they're an administrator, they can execute the PowerShell themselves. Maybe wrap it in a way that they just double click it. And then that will clear KMS, and then the WSA activation can take place.
Correct.
That might help out a lot of folks out there where users are admins on their devices. If they're not an admin on their device, then they have to come to the school parking lot one last time. We heard this happening all last year. They might have to come one more time to clean up the KMS, set up that CMG. I have a whole video on some of the free CMG stuff that you can do, right? Windows Update is not going to be an Azure bill, Office updates. There's a lot of workloads that you can do to CMG that are not super costly versus other things that are costly or have some financial cost to them. So they're probably going to have to come back one last time to kick that over. What if I'm a user, I log into the device, I have the license, it kicks over my Windows Pro EDU to EDU, it's fantastic, and then I log off and another person logs in, and they don't have the license? Well, what does it?
The device will still remain. Yeah, the device will still remain activated. It's just the device will do a check about every 28 days for that licensed user to log in.
Gotcha. So this isn't something that's checking every time that I log in, and if
correct, yeah,
different flavor of Windows depending on who logs in. It's checking if it's there. Correct. It's similar to like how KMS would check in.
Yep, exactly.
What if the person activates? They log in with their license. They switch over from Windows Pro EDU to EDU, and then they disconnect from the internet and they don't connect again. Are we then? I don't know what they're doing on their computer that they're not touching the internet, but, hypothetically, then they would have, maybe would this be similar to another time period before it would go to check in and then fail?
There's still the time periods apply to that. Yes.
Awesome. Well, this seems, I'm tracking this. It seems pretty good. I mean, you can, in Azure AD, as long as the device is somehow connected, users are allowed to join their devices or you've pushed a join policy to get them somehow connected with Azure. You can do group-based licensing through Azure Active Directory to push out that Windows license to everybody. They might already be doing it. I bet a lot of schools that just mass assigned A3, A5 licenses didn't uncheck the Windows subscription box. So that might not even be a change. That really limits.
I actually talked to a customer.
For sure.
That is exactly what happened with another customer I spoke to early this morning. They didn't even know. They were like, what? This is too easy. They were overwhelmed at the simplicity of it. And we've innovated so much where we've made things so simple. It's almost like counterintuitive to the Windows world. So yeah, Joe, it is that simple.
And then the only blocker then that a school might see is, I guess, if they have KMS set up and their users are not admins on their devices.
Correct. Yeah. There is one other blocker I want you to be aware of is it's not well documented, but you may get Windows activation errors in the sense of the version of Windows that's installed on that device must match the embedded key. So example of that is you purchased the device. It came with Professional Pro, but you reimaged the device and you put education, like Pro Education on that. Windows activation will get an activation failure because the key that's embedded on that device is a different one, or vice versa. It came with Pro Education and then you reimaged it with the normal Pro. You're going to get an activation error. So the rule of thumb, and this isn't well documented in there, is ensure that you have the version of Windows installed on the device that it came with. That's the easiest way. There's a couple other ways to run PowerShell to understand the keys, but the easiest way that I found to communicate this is what version came with those devices originally. Make sure that you have that installed on that device.
I think that's a great point because we have a lot of stories of schools who bought Windows home devices and then we'll reimage them to Pro EDU or EDU, and in that case, they're
and there's one other. Oh, sorry, I stepped on you.
Are they? No, it's fine. Are they stuck then if they bought the device?
No, they're not stuck. There's one get out of jail card. It's called the Mac key. So if you're using Intune or using Config Manager, or you have some ability to remotely invoke on that device, Intune has a really sweet way of you can deploy out a Mac key to a device. So it's the ultimate get out of jail card. But again, you upload a MAC key, you target a device, and that could change the edition and activate it and do everything. So the ultimate is that MAC key. But again, you need to have the ability to run elevated or have the device managed by my Intune on that. So that's the ultimate get out of jail card right there.
Gotcha. Last question. Any other things our EDU partners and customers should think about when it comes to activation?
I think the number one thing is just understanding here in the journey that devices need to be connected to Azure. That's where it trips up a lot of people because they think about the device is hybrid Azure AD joined. What does that mean? They oftentimes get confused around the 3 different ways a device gets connected to Azure. So just, I think really helping customers understand that. That's number one. The second part is really just, there's a lot of confusion around Office, aka M365 apps, and that there's 2 flavors. There's Office 2013, 2016, 2019 that's activated via KMS. That is a different version of Office than Office 365, aka M365 Apps, which is licensed via just that A3 license. And it could be licensed via, user, shared computer activation, or device-based licensing. And then that it's also cloud connected. So it's receiving monthly updates and new features and new capabilities, where that KMS is really just a snapshot in time. It works good and everything, but just we've evolved from that. And there are, the M365 apps version of Office is a better overall experience, not only from the management side, but the administration side, but from the end users. There's a great, if you ever go out and YouTube, the twins videos, they have 2 twins, and one of them's running the version of Office that's activated via KMS, and the other one that's activated via, M365 apps. And they ask them to create a PowerPoint or do certain tasks. And so they walk through that. They're really fun videos, just twins videos, Office 365, go YouTube that. Provides a really good understanding of what the value is to the end users and how those 2 products are different, but yet they fall under the same name. So I guess just recapping, confusion in Office, and then the other is really around just connecting devices to Azure, hybrid Azure AD join, Azure domain join, and Azure AD registered, and kind of helping customers understand those pieces.
Awesome. Well, on behalf of our partner ecosystem and customers tuning into this around the world, I just want to thank you for taking a couple minutes to come on and explain this a little bit more in depth than the documentation, and very specific to our education use cases. So thank you so much.
Anytime, Joe. Thanks for having me.